Hello, and welcome to the Cognitive Revolution, where we interview visionary researchers, entrepreneurs, and builders working on the frontier of artificial intelligence. Each week, we'll explore their revolutionary ideas, and together we'll build a picture of how AI technology will transform work, life, and society in the coming years. I'm Nathan Lebenz, joined by my co-host, Eric Torenberg. This episode is brought to you by WorkOS. If you're building a B2B SaaS application, at some point your customers will start asking for enterprise features like SAML authentication, SCIM provisioning, role-based access control, and audit trails. That's where WorkOS comes in, with easy-to-use and flexible APIs that help you ship enterprise features on day one without slowing down your core product development. Today, some of the hottest startups in the world are already powered by WorkOS, including ones you probably know like Perplexity, Vercel, Jasper, and Webflow. WorkOS also provides a generous free tier of up to 1 million monthly active users for user management, making it the perfect authentication and authorization solution for growing companies. It comes standard with rich features like bot protection, MFA, roles and permissions, and more. If you're currently looking to build SSO for your first enterprise customer, you should consider using WorkOS. Integrate in minutes and start shipping enterprise plans today. Hello, and welcome back to the Cognitive Revolution. Today, my guest is Wade Foster, co-founder and CEO of Zapier, the automation platform that's been a no-code pioneer since its founding in 2011. Zapier has long been known as an easy way to connect apps and automate workflows. But as Wade explains, they're now pursuing a much bigger vision to be, as Y Combinator president Gary Tan recently put it, the AI-powered knowledge worker of the future. In this conversation, Wade shares insights into how Zapier is embracing AI in their product and also adapting to AI as a company. More than 400,000 customers have already delegated more than 100 million tasks to AI through Zapier. And Wade highlights some of the most common and also some of the most original use cases, from AI-powered lead qualification and SDR-style outreach to a voice memo to invoice system that one customer built for his wife's small landscaping business. We also explore how Zapier, like so many other companies right now, is evolving its own product strategy, moving from a DIY platform to a done-for-you by AI platform with AI functionality woven throughout. While the AI functions that design Zaps are still a work in progress, it's clear that Zapier hopes to lower the barriers to entry by allowing anyone to design new workflows with a natural language interface. Along the way, we also touch on the challenges of decomposing tasks that are intuitive for humans into the sort of discrete steps that AI can handle effectively. Zapier's strategy for encouraging AI adoption internally, including their very founder mode decision to stop work across the entire company for a week-long AI hackathon after GPT-4 was released last year, Wade's tips for effective prompting and pushing the boundaries of what's possible with current models, and his perspective on the state of AI progress since GPT-4 and how that relates to his co-founder and previous guest Mike Knoop's perspective on progress toward AGI more generally. As always, if you're finding value in the show, we'd appreciate it if you take a moment to share it with friends or write us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And don't forget, you can always share your feedback or suggestions via our website, cognitiverevolution.ai, or by DMing me on your favorite social network. Now, I hope you enjoy this inside look at AI-powered automation at scale with Wade Foster, CEO of Zapier. Wade Foster, CEO of Zapier, welcome to the Cognitive Revolution.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Nathan.
I'm excited for this. You guys obviously have built a very well-known company in the no-code space, one of the early category definers. And I wanted to start off with just big picture stuff about the company, and then definitely we'll have a chance to go deep on some of the AI products and features and cultural adaptations that I'm sure that you're dealing with over the last couple of years. For starters, obviously the competition has grown up around you, right, as they've seen your success. How would you describe Zapier today in an increasingly crowded market? What's the key competitive advantage? Why do people choose you? Why is Zapier still leading in the space?
You're right. There's a lot more options forever, which I think is good for everybody to have that. But I think the thing that Zapier still does better than everyone else is it's just so easy to get started with. It's not hard to come in and go like, you know what? I want to make a new payment from Stripe, post into Slack. I want to take this attachment I get in from Gmail and push this into Dropbox. And just start with these like real basic integrations and just start to get your wheels turning. And then I think the thing that we have increasingly been doing at Zapier is saying, hey, it's not just integrations. It's how do you really build like a full-blown automation platform out of this stuff? And so more and more folks get started with Zapier on these easy things, but then find that the depth of the platform just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And so they end up just being able to do more and more with Zapier. And it's not necessary to go look for other things to solve an increasing amount of problems at the end of the day. And so I think that easy to get started and just more depth for use, like just keeps people in and around the ecosystem.
When you talk about depth, is that like number of other things that you integrate with, or how do you measure depth?
Yeah, we've launched things like tables and interfaces in the last couple of years. And so now it's not just simply like an integration you can do, but you can actually build on full-on applications. We had a customer earlier this year that I met who had a wife that started a gardening business. She always wanted to start a gardening business. And it turns out she liked the gardening part more than the business part, and would never send out invoices to customers, just wouldn't do it. And so husband was like lovingly like, hey, sweetie, I'm glad you're having fun with this, but it would be great if maybe we could get paid. And he started thinking like, how could I make this easier for her to get paid? And turns to Zapier and says, I wonder if I can do something that makes it a lot easier to build these invoices. Turns out he could. And he made what he calls voice to invoice. And what it is, made a little app on his phone, and it's powered by JotForm, which has a field where you can just press record. That's all the form does. You just press record and you just talk into it. And so when you talk into it, he says, hey, met with this client today, Sally. We agreed on a budget of $150 for tulips and $200 for daisies or whatever. And that then goes through Zapier, sends it to the Whisper API for transcription. Then that gets sent to ChatGPT, has a couple prompts, then extract out the actual terms of the invoice. And then that gets sent to a Google spreadsheet that starts to enumerate, okay, $100 for this item, $200 for that item. And then eventually gets sent to QuickBooks to generate the invoice and gets in. And now you can build these full-on applications. 10 years ago, that would have been, you could raise $1 million on an idea like that. Nowadays, he's able to build that on Zapier in 30 minutes, an hour. That to me is what's increasingly awesome about the combination of no code and AI is the types of experiences that just savvy people can build, not necessarily engineers, just people who are using their brain a little bit can build pretty impressive stuff. I think that's the thing that just gets me excited right now.
Yeah, one of the things that gets me excited is when I saw Gary Tan tweet about Zapier that Zapier could be the AI knowledge worker of the future. And this is sort of one early, example of this in the wild. Is that how you think about the kind of big picture potential for the company today? Do you want it to be something that feels like a knowledge worker companion, or is that too out there for what you would define as your goal?
Well, we've had this line on our about page for a long time, which is we're just some humans who think computers should do more work. And I think where that comes from is that certainly us as founders, but like the people we hang out, the folks who are around, it's not uncommon for us to have ideas of, I'd like to build this, or I'd like an app that does this thing. And to realize pretty quickly, it's harder than we thought it would be. There's more hassle. The technology's not quite there. And the distance it takes to go from like idea to execution is pretty big still. And at the end of the day, what we're just trying to do at Zapier is shrink that distance, make it so much quicker for a person to just go from idea to like living, breathing thing at the end of the day. So I do get pretty excited about the potential of Zapier to be this just sidekick, assistant, like you insert whatever word, but like it's going to be this tool that just sits by you to help you solve a whole host of problems that you might have. Generally at work is where we're spending most of our time thinking about this stuff.
Yeah, it's really interesting how over the last year, right, we've all been on quite a journey of figuring out what more work can computers do broadly than they used to be able to do. And we know that there's a pretty big answer to that, but the exact shape of it and the sort of nooks and crannies are often quite surprising. Obviously, you can do a lot more with Zapier now than you could in a let's say, GPT-4 world. Do you have kind of stats or ways of describing how much of the individual task flows that are flowing through Zapier involve some AI element today? I guess you could just measure that in terms of how often are people calling OpenAI or Claude or whatever.
We're at about 400,000 customers that have delegated now over 100 million tasks to AI. And it's the fastest growing category on Zapier is AI related workflows. I'm very bullish on like the potential of this as a, thing that's going to continue to solve problems for a lot of folks.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So 400,000 customers and 100 million individual tasks.
Yeah.
So that's 100
tasks,
million like trigger logic and output that had some language model call.
Some AI was involved somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So let's talk about the shape of that. I think this is one of the hardest things for people who are new and not obsessed with it as I am. And I sometimes think it took me thousands of hours to map out for myself and develop my intuition. Maybe you can give us some shortcuts and you have the benefit of obviously all these customers.
Yeah.
I guess for starters, what are some of the most impressive, like hardest, highest stakes successes that you've seen where people are able to get AI to do something that like really moves the needle for them?
Yeah. Well, I mentioned the voice to invoice problem there. I think another example that comes to mind is Siki Chen, who's the CEO at Runway. Runway sells this, you can almost think of it like Notion meets like financial planning. It makes it really easy for people who aren't in finance to like understand like the finances of the business and figure out how it works. Siki, the Runway team, they are great at building product. And as great as they are at that, they might be even better at marketing product. And so when they announced like their new site, it kind of went viral. And they pretty instantly had dozens of people signing up for access to the product in a minute. And this is a pretty small team. And the engineers are all 100% focused on building the actual product. And sales team is like 2 people. There's 1 person on success. So there's just not that many people here. And they're getting dozens of folks coming in every single minute. So, what do they do? Siki says, hey, I wonder if I can build something with Zapier, ChatGPT to help us better qualify these folks coming in and send out prospects for them. And one of the things he builds is a quick zap that takes the lead that hits their database, pops it over to Zapier. They then iterate through the latest batch that comes through. And in doing that, hits a ChatGPT and filters out anything that's a free email domain. And so instead of having to enumerate all the email domains, they can just tell ChatGPT anything that looks like free, just figure it out. So they can kind of vaguely tell it. And then ChatGPT figures out the rest. Then they have the leftover ones hit Clearbit and say, hey, I want to go enrich all these because these feel like they could be actual legitimate prospects. I think they then come back and hit ChatGPT one more time and say, for the qualified folks, we want you to write an email draft. And they have a very specific prompt they use in ChatGPT that it's like, hey, make it witty, but not cringe, and some guidance for like how they want to send this. And then they have that land in Gmail as a draft. And so in the morning, those sales reps can pop into their Gmail drafts and go like, send, quickly review them because you want to just double check it a little bit. But they can move through these things in a way that if they were trying to do all that stuff manually, you couldn't have done it with the headcount they have. And so when you ask Siki, like the impact of that is I would have had to hire another 10, 20 people to get that job done. And instead, this was something he built in 30 minutes on Zapier, ChatGPT, a few other tools, etc. So I think you see stories like that are pretty common, honestly. The biggest hurdle I think folks have is just actually coming up with the ideas for them. The creativity is, I think, the hardest part. And I certainly see this pretty regularly. You probably come across this too. You like go on Twitter, X, whatever, and you'll see folks that are like in the scene, the AI scene, and they'll be like, what do you actually use AI for? What actually are you using it for? And I think we're in that period where some of the novelty of the demos have worn off and folks are still sometimes searching for, yeah, but where's the sticky use case? Where's the impact? Where's the repeatable stuff? And so I think it's really useful to get Danny and Siki and all these other use cases out there for folks because they can start to go, okay, I don't have that exact problem, but I have a version of that. And now I can figure out maybe how do I go replicate it for myself.
To go a little bit deeper in the advice that you would give people, or what are the takeaways from that? I think creativity or having the ideas is definitely one limiting factor. I think another is not having a good sense for what the AI is going to do, what it's not going to do well. Recently, I've heard a number of people say that you only want to use the AI where it's strictly required. Anything that can be done in a traditional code way should, because it'll be better, faster, cheaper. Mm-hmm. Then there's some things that are kind of in between where it's like classification or like deciding on like a fork in the road. How sort of detailed do you recommend people, or do you find people need to be in terms of exactly how prescriptive they're going to be? Another way to say that is like, how much do the AIs actually have any autonomy in deciding what to do versus being told exactly like, this is your input, this is your task, and we want the output in this format?
I think at the stage we're at right now, you definitely have to be more prescriptive. There is a very real last mile problem based on the state of the art that we have today. And so I do think I would subscribe to the advice you gave there, which is if you have a job to be done that can be done in a deterministic way with code, or you can use a no-code tool, but at the end of the day, it's all code under the hood. You're probably going to want to have it run that way because it's going to be more reliable, it's going to be cheaper, it's going to be faster, you're going to have all those things that you get there. And then there are a handful of like things that an AI or LLMs are quite good at, certain tasks that you actually can't do it the other way. Or maybe you could, but it's exceptionally difficult. And that is things like, how do you extract information from unstructured text? How do you, categorization you mentioned. So if you got to go categorize a whole bunch of stuff, it's going to be better, faster, cheaper than a human. If you want it to generate text or generate something novel, it's going to be better at those types of things. So there's a whole host of use cases that we actually didn't have a way to do those pre-LLMs, but you can inject an LLM in the middle of a deterministic workflow and now have a whole new type of thing that you can build. And so today, that is, I think, where we're seeing the most success. And I'll be honest, we had to figure that out too. We launched a product, Central, that was inference everywhere, was trying to use AI to delegate a whole bunch of tasks. And it is having some success, but the place where a lot of that 400,000 users and 100 million tasks, that's happening through our traditional workflow engine. And I think it's because in that traditional workflow engine, you can pair, mix and match deterministic steps with an AI step, and you can basically delegate exactly what you want to the spot that you need it. And that improves the overall reliability of the end-to-end task at the end of the day.
Hey, we'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors.
Today's episode is brought to you in part by Weights and Biases. As a developer, the journey from concept to production-ready large language model apps is fraught with challenges. Dealing with unpredictable large language model outputs, correctly handling PII, and ballooning API costs can all be blockers to shipping your next AI-powered feature. Weights and Biases Weave is a lightweight AI developer toolkit designed to simplify your large language model app development. With Weave, you can trace and debug input, metadata, and output with just 2 lines of code. Weave helps you run rigorous evaluations and securely manage all of your datasets and system configurations, so you can focus on what matters most, iterating and improving on your large language model-powered applications. Plus, Weave integrates seamlessly with your favorite APIs and libraries, including OpenAI, Anthropic, Mistral, Cohere, LangChain, Llama Index, and more. So make real progress on your large language model development. Visit w&b.me/cr to get started with Weave today. That's w&b.me/cr, and thanks to Weights and Biases for sponsoring this episode. I am really excited that our new sponsor, 80,000 Hours, is now offering free one-on-one career advising sessions to Cognitive Revolution listeners. 80,000 Hours aims to be the best source of advice for people who want to do the most good that they possibly can with their careers. We typically work for about 40 years in our lifetime, and we work about 2,000 hours per year. That is the single biggest opportunity that most of us have to make a positive contribution, and it's worth being strategic about it. That's where 80,000 Hours can help. I actually used their career advising service myself. 2 years ago, I had just finished the GPT-4 red teaming project, and I wanted to do anything I could to nudge the AI future in a positive direction. But what could or should I do? That was not clear. After my call with 80,000 Hours, I got a number of connections to outstanding individuals in the space, and over the course of the follow-on conversations, I developed confidence that this podcast was one of the projects that I should pursue. Today, I'm thrilled to have built an audience of thoughtful, high-potential people that 80,000 Hours wants to help. To request a free one-on-one career advising session, follow the link in the show notes. It's 80,000hours.org/cognitive revolution. That's 80,000hours.org/cognitive revolution. Sign up for a free one-on-one career advising session, figure out how you can make a positive impact on the AI future, and I think you'll be glad that you did. How often are you seeing your users need to really push for LLM performance to get it to where they need it? Like for Siki, for example, is he able to do this on just a good prompt? Does he need like few shot examples, or does he have to go as far as like fine tuning a model to do certain key tasks?
Yeah, most of our folks are just doing it with basic prompting. You probably want to spend a little bit of time on your prompting, but it's not like you're having to spend hours crafting the perfect prompt at the end of the day. You can usually prompt it, maybe add a few examples if you feel like it, but you don't even have to do that in a lot of cases. And so that's where I think folks are seeing a lot of the success today. No one's having to go train their own models or anything like that for the use cases we're seeing on Zapier.
Are there use cases that you've seen people kind of have many people want to do and try to do and just for whatever reason not be able to achieve any sort of no-go or there be dragon sort of zones you would describe?
I think we like to communicate much more like colloquially. And there's a delta between that and how computers work today. There's a real skill, even still, in describing stuff to computers. And so that's like what we just touched on with prompts. The best prompts are pretty specific. And so there's a real skill that comes with authoring prompts. I think most folks, they get tripped up because they haven't actually really worked on that skill set at the end of the day. And so their prompts end up kind of vague, or especially vague, that it's really hard for the LLM to figure out what it's going to do. But if you actually step back and think about it, it's probably hard for a human to figure out what you want to do too, if you're being that vague. But I think the real magic is going to come when these models can get to a point where they can handle increasingly vague statements and where they're figuring out how to take a just like really messy human statement and then actually transcribe that into a better prompt under the hood, or at least prompt the human back to say, hey, did you want more like A or more like B? You know, that's what you would do if you're working with an assistant. You're just like, hey, can you go get me lunch or whatever? And they'd be like, sure. Do you want this or that? And it's actually neither. Could you do that? Like a great assistant kind of knows how to interact with you in that way. And I think that's really what we're waiting for these models, is to get to where they can kind of learn from you a little bit and extract your preferences and have a little bit more memory and context and use that to keep getting better and better over time.
Yeah. Tyler Cowan says context is that which is scarce. I'm working on a project right now to try to get, I assume it's going to ultimately be a fine-tuned model. I'm not sure exactly which one will be best, but try to get some model to write as me and try to do that in a way that hopefully I will find compelling. So my strategy for this is to combine a huge amount of context. And I'm currently in the process of like trying to extract my data out of all these different places where it is locked up, Gmail, Twitter, and whatever, and then try to summarize that into something where it's hopefully still going to be pretty long, pretty thorough, pretty fact rich, so that the AI has enough to go on, and then also train it on my actual output so that it hopefully can pick up my style and patterns and whatnot. And then that's when I'm going to start putting things through Zaps and being like, okay, can you respond to this email as me, knowing that you have 50,000 words of context on me, so that you don't have to hallucinate things. And I don't 100% yet know if that's going to work, but some of the stuff we've seen just in the last couple of weeks with GPT-4o fine-tuning on the software engineering benchmark definitely suggests that there is a lot of juice still there.
Yeah, you might be able to do that without fine-tuning. We did a similar version, my assistant and I, where we took a bunch of my own emails, posts I'd written internally, Slack messages, all that sort of stuff, and fed it into one of these things and said, hey, the prompt was effectively like, describe the writing style here. And then we just did a couple iterations of that to where now we actually have a pretty like consolidated prompt. It's not that long, that basically describes my own personal writing style. And we used that. We actually ran an internal test where we had a bunch of questions that were submitted by employees. And I went through myself and answered those questions. Then we had an AI version of me answer those questions. And then we posed back to the company, which answer is Wade? Which answer is AI Wade? And it wasn't that easy for the company to tell. I think folks still picked up on me a little bit more often, but it was still pretty clearly like that this prompt effectively was doing a pretty darn good job of that.
The CEO Turing test is maybe the next default.
It's pretty fascinating, though, to think about, because how many folks would love to actually get feedback from the CEO, but are maybe a little scared for whatever reason. And just being able to talk to somebody, it's like you can get the advice of Wade, but maybe without the judgment of Wade. That might be a perk at the end of the day.
That's funny. So just to make sure I have this set up correct, it was purely using a prompt.
You basically just go to ChatGPT or Claude or any of these things and feed it a bunch of documents, data, etc. And then you just ask it, can you generate a prompt for me that would cause you to write in the style of all this stuff. That's effectively what you're trying to get it to do. And then you might have to loop through it a handful of times, ask it a couple different ways, and then you'll get like a nice prompt that you can say, and you can make it your system prompt then if you want in ChatGPT, and it works pretty good.
I get that process, but do I understand correctly that you didn't include any actual samples?
We gave a bunch of samples.
Too, okay.
No. So let me back up. We gave it a bunch of examples that generated the prompt, but then that prompt itself stands alone.
Does all the
and
work.
You can just
No
use
other
that.
examples.
Yeah.
I've tried that a bit, and I would say my current state of the art pre-fine tuning for Write As Me is give it just a bunch of samples and ask it to write as me.
Yeah.
And I find Claude does the best at that for me, and it works pretty well also. One of the challenges that I've had is I get a lot of hallucinations if it is just kind of working with all these samples, and it's like, from the LLM's perspective, I feel like I appear to be making up facts, right? It has a hard time separating fact from fiction. What I'm writing is like plausible enough, and then it will write plausible enough stuff, but it'll be wrong. Do you think that there is a way in which perhaps just the generally like well-known status of Zapier and you is trained into the model in such a way where you're benefiting from base training perhaps? Because otherwise, like, it would need context. Presumably, I don't know what questions you're answering here, but like, what's the deal with the team retreat, right? It's not going to know how to answer that. So how do you make sure that it is like grounded enough to be effective?
Yeah, I do think that is where it falls down today. If you're asking about something very specific to Zapier that would not be in the training, like some internal knowledge, that's not going to be in the training data anywhere. It's not going to be in the samples from at least the standalone prompt. And so that's just not going to do a good job at that kind of answers. It's going to do what all these AI models. It's going to hallucinate. It's going to give you a very confident sounding answer that looks correct and is just wildly not.
Yeah. So going back to what people do on the platform and the sort of the limitations, you said it's easy to get started, connect one thing to another thing. It's, presumably a lot harder for most people to think about how they take something that they do intuitively and break it down into, I think Siki's thing was 16 steps. We had him on the show not too long ago.
Oh, did he share the same
We
thing?
didn't get into the SDR thing in depth. We talked more about like how they're using AI in the Runway product. He did mention it very briefly, but anyway, that sort of decomposition and layering of structure onto something that people do in a kind of muscle memory sort of way, I assume also must be like a real challenge for a lot of people. And I wonder, how do you help them with that? And to what degree can AI help them with that? Like, there is the product experience where you go in, you can either just start with a blank canvas and start building steps one after the other, or you can say, here's what I want to build and have AI generate a draft for you. Are people really attracted to that? Like, how well is that experience working for folks today?
Yeah, people are definitely attracted to that and using it today. I think it is still fairly immature, to be honest, but it is working. And pretty much daily, we'll get notes of folks that are like, holy cow, that actually worked. I think the magic of it is, as easy as we've made Zapier, if you're going to try and set something up without an AI, there's a lot of configuration that you have to do. You have to think through triggers and actions and connect apps and map fields, and there's just kind of a lot of buttons you got to click. Now, it's easy to click the buttons, but there's a lot of buttons, a lot of knobs to turn. And so the idea of being able to describe in natural language what you want, or to have a little bit of a thought partner to say, hey, can I do something like this? How might I do this? And it to feed you back ideas, it acts kind of like a better rubber duck for you on these things. I do think there's two vectors of improvement that we're working on. One is the like better coach, better guide for these things. So you're still in control as the human, but you can ask it questions and it can say, why don't you try this? Or why don't you go this way? Or might this work for you? And it's helping you come up with ideas. It's helping you get your creative juices flowing. So that's vector one. I think the second vector is then, how do you actually take over some or all of the building for you? Because that's another big hurdle where you can say, hey, okay, you said you wanted this. I've already done it. Do you want me to go ahead and insert that in for you? And that's a different sort of like lane of improvement to go on. I think both are pretty necessary to help folks reach their fullest potential. I think if you're just doing building, you're only going to be successful with folks that sort of show up with ideas. And if you're just doing the ideas only, the building still is sophisticated enough that folks get tripped up along the way. And so you have to improve on both dimensions to really reach its fullest potential.
Have you used Gamma.app?
I haven't yet, no.
I definitely recommend them. I think Gamma, which is another former guest, is great at providing a sort of guided experience at the beginning. What do you want to say? Give you an outline. Okay, iterate on that a little bit. It's a slide maker. So now we translate this thing to a series of slides. And then when you get into the slide level, also, there's like the AI is also kind of at that level. Like, do you want me to revise this one slide? And they also do a really nice job on accept or reject changes. I think they've got a really tasteful UI on that front. So anyway, I recommend them. Do you have others that you look to that you think are out in front right now in terms of their maturity for AI guided experiences?
I think what like Claude is doing with artifacts is like pretty impressive right now. Like I think you're just going to see a lot more of that kind of experience where you have AI on one side, builder motif on the other. And it would not surprise me if the next generation of the application layer feels a lot like that, where you almost have this idea of like disposable experiences where it's spin up a thing, use it, and then that's it. Last for a moment in time. I think those experiences are just pretty freaking incredible when they work. How often are you like on your phone looking for a mobile app to do some utility thing? You're like, it would just be better if I could create it. And if the time it took me to create it was, I don't know, what, under 10 minutes, under 5 minutes? I don't know. Like, what's the time frame in which you'd go like, this is actually better experience than going through the app store and trying to figure out like what I would do. So that's the kind of thing I think we're gunning for here.
Hey, we'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Omneky uses generative AI to enable you to launch hundreds of thousands of ad iterations that actually work, customized across all platforms with a click of a button. I believe in Omneky so much that I invested in it, and I recommend you use it too. Use CogRev to get a 10% discount.
Yeah, it's happening fast. I was just complaining earlier today that I don't have a good personal search engine. Like, I want to just search through all the stuff that I've previously seen effectively. Yep. And that's still oddly difficult, I find. Somebody responded, maybe you should just build one. And I was like, you know what? Maybe I should. It does feel much more in reach.
There was the product, I think they rebranded, Rewind.
I was super excited for that, but they've pivoted away from that vision and narrowed in a little bit more. And I'm not sure exactly why, but in my experience, I did have challenges with that thing just like consuming a lot of resources on my computer. It sort of would bog down the machine. That was a barrier. So you have a co-founder who's out with a big prize who is saying that progress toward AGI has stalled. Cards on the table. I don't quite share that perspective. I wonder how you would address that disagreement from the standpoint of just what is happening within the Zapier platform by users. So if we look back at GPT-4 18 months ago, first version, and then we fast forward to today, there's been a lot of things that have launched, right? Like longer context windows, multimodality, fine-tuning of advanced models, just way cheaper for one thing. And from my perspective, it seems like those things have unlocked a lot, but maybe for practical purposes, for most people, they haven't unlocked so much. Have you seen the frontier of the sort of difficulty or the value of tasks move a lot over the last 18 months? Or would you say it has been more like, of course, like it has diffused, I'm sure like more users are doing stuff, but in terms of the most impressive examples, how much more impressive are they than 18 months ago?
They're hugely more impressive. Like the progress has been unquestionably strong, I think. Mike points out, and I think sometimes gets misconveyed, is he really focuses on that G in AGI. And the definition he would use of AGI, which is obviously, depending on who you talk to, you're going to hear a million different definitions, is its ability to learn something new from scratch. It's like basically being able to hop domains. And right now, I think what he would say is what's happening in LLMs is that it's trained on a set of stuff, and then it's effectively pattern matching on top of that. And I think there's some truth to that. But the reality is bigger models, like cheaper, multimodal, the commercial value, the useful utility of automation has grown immensely. And I think that's where Zapier is playing most right now, is like, how do we actually help people just build more useful automation inside their workplace? And on that dimension, compared to where we were 18 months ago, it's like night and day difference. Like working with unstructured data was nearly impossible. I remember we built an email parser. It's been years ago. And that thing was like the bane of our existence. People wanted that thing to do so much, but the current state of the art email parsing tech was just not good enough. Now you can just do a basic prompt and it's better than any parsing engine that you would use 2-3 years ago. So yeah, the progress is incredible here.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I was just thinking about an email parsing project earlier. And yeah, especially HTML emails, like for folks who don't know, it's the gnarliest thing in the entire world. Somehow we have ended up in this state where it's like the worst vestiges of old technology have somehow been grandfathered into HTML emails. And it is a real nightmare to try to code. One might say you might need to be AGI complete to just deal with HTML emails.
Morgan email.
But I guess that definition is probably a little too permissive. So what do you hope for next? Obviously, there's a lot of speculation around Strawberry, Q-Star, whatever. Zapier strikes me as being in sort of an interesting position where if I'm in the workflow business as you are, and it's like, man, this is amazing because all these hard things that we just used to not be able to program to do, now we can just kind of drop a little AI into this otherwise structured workflow and now it works. Amazing. But a lot of people also have this vision that might not be too far off where they're like, I just don't even want to think about that sort of structure. I just want to hand the AI a project level thing and say, go do this, figure it out, come back and show me when you're done. More like the classic intern who you just give something to and wait. How does that play with Zapier, you think? Like, do you want something that can do like mid-scale, longer time horizon tasks? Do you want something that's just like much more reliable in terms of like very local things? Is there a form of that sort of agent thing that becomes like a competitive force vis-a-vis Zapier?
Yeah, I think, what do I want? What do consumers want? We all want a world where we can increasingly describe tasks to be done in simpler, vaguer language and have an assistant just go do those things. Like, that sounds like the dream, doesn't it? The question is then, what type of product experience do you need to deliver on that? And I still think under the hood, you're going to have like some form of workflow engine that's powering a lot of this stuff, because you're going to have to route data to different services. You're going to have it execute various tasks within inside that. It's going to have to feed the output to some other service, and you're going to have to deliver it back to the user. I think you're also going to have different types of jobs to be done. There's some things that you want super low latency, and cost is going to be a real important concern. And so that's going to have to work in one particular way. You have other areas where it's like accuracy is like really, really, really important, and you're willing to spend a lot of money on it. So that experience is going to look quite different too. I think you go into any business and it's full of workflows that all have different shapes, sizes, contours, what have you. And so I think we're going to just see an enormous different ways that these things can sort of be put together. I think the question is, are we going to have one godlike AI that you can just interface with, that just magically knows behind the scenes how to route and do all that sort of stuff? Maybe. I don't see a ton of evidence that's what's coming next. And then, of course, if we get there, like all of us who build this kind of stuff are, who knows what we're going to do at that point in time. You start to get to AGI territory where it's hard to, your guess is as good as mine of what the world will look like then. But in the meantime, I'm pretty bullish on how we at Zapier can take these smarter, more flexible models and inject them into like your existing toolkits to help you solve bigger, better problems and easier to use interfaces.
For your AI sort of builder experience, the sort of what do you want to build? Okay, here's a somewhat vague description of the Zap that I want to create. How far have you pushed that today? And how much farther do you think there is to push it before you would be maxing out what current models can do and would, only see benefit from the next step up in reasoning capability or whatever?
I think there's still quite a bit more we can do with the existing models, but we're definitely starting to feel like the boundaries of some of this stuff, where it's like there's certain types of tasks that we can do pretty predictably if they're simple enough and small enough. But when it breaks outside the bounds of those things, it definitely feels like self-driving cars, where it's like you can get the demo sort of working, but that last mile stuff ends up being exceptionally difficult. It's all the edge cases, the weird anomalies, the things like that, where humans can spot those things pretty easily, but the AI will just trip up on those things left and right. And that's where I do think we're just waiting for the models to see, hey, are they going to have a step function improvement and what it's capable of? And if so, great. That's going to unlock a whole new set of tasks for ourselves. But even within the existing models, I still think there's more we can do to make that experience just better across a whole number of workflows.
My number one tip for people generally is fine tune on chain of thought or reasoning traces, they're sometimes called, but basically demonstrate with not necessarily a huge number of examples exactly how you want to approach the task, kind of all the stuff that happens in the internal monologue that typically in work doesn't get captured, right? Because we just have often like a ticket definition and then the result, and the thought process that happened in between is usually not captured. But getting some of that stuff down in explicit form and then fine tuning on that so that the model is now like imitating not just your outputs, but also the reasoning process to get there. That's my number one thing usually for pushing product experiences like that. What have you found to be, the biggest step up in performance of all the things?
I think what you just described is like pretty accurate. I think in some ways it's almost like the opposite of what you want to do for Google search. Like in Google search, you're like just so lazy. It's like the shortest little keyword or whatever snippet that you can get. When you're working with these models, you want to describe it in its fullest like version of itself. So that definitely stands out for sure. More examples is good. Yeah, I think narrowing the task is also really helpful. And then starting to chain those narrower sets of tasks. Like the more you try and like do multiple sets of things in one, you're going to see it trip over. And so I think this, to the extent that you can say, hey, I only need to extract X here. And then the next step is, okay, now I want you to do this next thing here. That to me is the next thing that really has helped improve performance, especially within the workflow engine, is to really get hyper specific about that stuff, break it down to its most granular bits that you can think of.
Yeah. Test decomposition, definitely also really big.
Yeah. And it's tricky. We don't walk around as humans usually thinking about like the smallest bit of the task. It's kind of a nerdy concept.
Yeah, I just was joking to somebody. You want to pretend like you're Dickens and you're being paid by the word for your reasoning between the input and output.
Well, like what's that old thing that I feel like everyone does this like in elementary school where there's two people, one person is going to make like a peanut butter jelly sandwich, and then you have to give them instructions on how to make the peanut butter jelly sandwich. And the person on the other side is instructed to only do what the person tells you to do. And like chaos always ensues because it turns out it's a lot more complicated to describe how to make a peanut butter jelly sandwich than we think it actually is. So it feels a little bit like that experience at the end of the day.
That's a good exercise that maybe schools should be doing more of, because clear communication certainly seems like it's always valuable, but only heading upward in importance and returns.
Yeah, it's not lost on me that I do think the people with the best communication skills might end up being really exceptional managers. Like folks that are just really well equipped to doing this might actually end up being some of the folks who have already developed some of the best skills for working in this world, because they're used to delegation, they're used to describing their intent really well, and they might end up really thriving in like this next chapter of the economy because they've already tuned this engine really well, versus maybe the rest of us who are still trying to figure exactly what delegation means might have some work to do.
Shifting focus a little bit to how you guys are working internally at Zapier, how would you describe the productivity gains that you've seen within the company? Obviously, software development is one seemingly very natural use case. Are you guys able to qualitatively or quantitatively say we're producing more software in a given unit of time? Do you have tools, best practices? Is everybody using Cursor? What's it look like now within Zapier just on the development front?
The biggest step function change we saw was probably 15, 16 months ago, where this would have been probably around the time of GPT-4 release. We stopped the company for a full week and said, hey, we're going to do, hands down, we're going to do AI hackathon. And it's for everybody, not just engineers, everybody in the company. So if you're an engineer, we want you to go build with this stuff. If you're a non-engineer, we want you to go use it, get used to these things, figure out what it's doing, etc. And in the weeks and months after that, we saw the adoption of AI go from probably 10% of the workforce to past 50. I think it got up to maybe 60, 70% of the workforce using it as a day-to-day tool in their job. Qualitatively, it is like a very common tool in people's tool chests. It's hard to measure exactly quantitatively where that's showing up. I think engineers are using like copilots. There's a lot of buzz around Cursor. Cloud artifacts are a lot of fun to play with. There's a lot of just like people using it to write code. They're using it to write integration code. They're using it to write just any sorts of features. So that's like super common. Your data analysts, like that's a team that if you said, hey, what if we took ChatGPT away from you? What would you do? And so you're going to pry it from our cold, dead hands. So there's huge step function gains and functions like that. I think on the GTM side, seeing a lot on just like various forms of content creation. I think you got to be careful there. A lot of companies I see use it in ways that are borderline spam. It's not actually going to help them stand out and do interesting things. But I think, again, if you're using it as an assistant, and if you're really trying to make sure, like, here's what your quality bar is, here's the types of things you want out of this. If you have really good prompts, you can find a way to generate like hyper personalized emails at scale. You can find a way to generate like really good templates around how your product works, like really good. If you're e-commerce, you can generate great product descriptions for the products you have. There's these use cases that around the content generation side that are really quite good. But I find the degree of quality there to be quite wide right now. So there's a lot of folks where I'm like, don't do that. You're going to give the industry a bad name if it doesn't already have a bad name. But the people who are using it very deftly, I think are having a ton of success. Our HR team has been huge adopters of this stuff. They're using it all throughout onboarding to help guide folks into the company. We have chatbots for all of our handbooks, documentation, things like that. It's super common experience probably in any company where you're like, drop into a Slack channel. Can anyone give me the answer to this? In the past, there's a fleet of humans answering those questions, even though it's been answered before. It's in some document somewhere. So our HR team has done a really good job of consolidating those into chatbots and setting up Slack bots that answer that stuff on their behalf. Using it for again, an assistant for helping you write really good like performance reviews. I think performance reviews in every company is everybody's like worst nightmare headache to do. And so we've got little chatbots that help people just, hey, toss like their accomplishments, the things they got to work in, and it'll just write it for you. And so it saves everybody time to just be like, do the sloppy version of it. And it ends up actually being quite good versus wasting all this time on like polish and presentation and all that stuff that doesn't matter. I think we've just seen across the company in every department, people are going through the learning curve of figuring out where can we use these tools to up-level the work we do. And not everything's a winner. There's certain stuff, like a lot of companies are talking about how much success they're having, for example, in customer service. I think for us, like we're actually finding it harder to get gains in customer service than others are finding. And I think maybe that is because the diversity of our support, the technical of our support is pretty high. Now, we're still having success there, but it's not like the Klarna example that made the waves probably, 6 months ago, where it was like, we were able to get rid of 700 jobs or what have you. And I looked at that and I was like, yeah, I think that's probably because they weren't doing much with automation to begin with. And so they had just a lot more gains to be had, where like, I think we were already pretty sophisticated on this front. And so the gains that we could eke out of it were just not as much. I don't know. We're still working on it. We still think there's a lot of improvements that could be had. We just haven't quite cracked the nut yet. I think your mileage probably varies, and it just requires a lot of experimentation is what we're finding.
Yeah, certainly everything is extremely context dependent. You mentioned stopping the company for a week. I love that anecdote. Beyond that, have you done anything else? For example, I see companies with all kinds of different intuitions, right? Some are like, we want to have a bottoms-up experimental culture. We want to give prizes to the people that come up with the best AI automations. Others are like, this is going to be, thou shalt not put anything into ChatGPT, but it's not officially sanctioned. How do you approach that? There's also management, right? Do you set an expectation? Everybody's going to do something. You're going to be accountable on a quarterly basis for some AI adoption milestone or whatever. How have you approached that from a cultural standpoint? What would you recommend to others?
Yeah, I think you got to feel it out. We started in sort of like a little bit more of a bottoms-up approach. And around the ChatGPT launch, we just were like, hey, this is cool. Like, you should check it out. Everybody should try it. Just trying to soft influence to get folks doing it. When the GPT-4 launch came out, we felt, okay, this needs to be a lot more of a tops-down mandate. And so that's when we stopped the company for the week, said, hey, you got to go do this, and we got to go figure this out. I think now we have a bit more of a healthy mix, where it's like in some places we're like, hey, there is a strategic imperative reason for us to go figure this out. So we are going to say this needs to happen. In other areas of the company, it's more just like, hey, you're smart. You know tools. You figure it out. You're going to figure it out. And we're just keeping tabs on that stuff. In terms of things that have worked to keep the drumbeat going, we've done a couple things. When we ran the hackathon, we worked with both legal and our technical teams and data privacy and all that sort of stuff to set up some rules of engagement to make sure it was done in a way that we felt, took really good care of customer data and all that sort of stuff. We felt like it was important to have guardrails around some of those things. I would not suggest just going Wild West without working with your teams to create the proper environment to do this. That was a really important first step for us that we did in combination with legal engineering teams, things like that. And then since we've gotten on from that, we do an all hands every Thursday, once a week. Every month or so, we usually will do like an AI showcase as part of those all hands. We'll just curate maybe half a dozen use cases, and folks will record little videos or come in and show off things live, and it'll just be like showing off what they do. And so that pushes some cool use cases, get people's minds churning. We have a fun AI channel inside of Slack where people are showing off stuff that they're building, things that they're playing with. We have a handful of both engineers and non-technical, but like very sophisticated AI builders that will do like weekly AI office hours that anyone can just show up and share stuff around. So we just tried to like foster these like forums, whether they're official forums, like tops down, do it this way, or just employees taking initiative and figuring these things out. And we just generally tried to put more oomph behind any of these things because we think that there's just so much goodness that can come from that. It does require a little bit of the company to like encourage it and nudge it along. I think the biggest thing that I would tell other leaders is don't be shy about saying this is important. I think that's why you've seen a lot of the founder-led businesses have probably done better during this period, is because we're able to just come in and say, let's go do it. I think more companies have that ability than they realize. Just say, this is important. If we sleep on this stuff, it's going to be a problem. Maybe it's not a problem today, but give it a year, give it 5 years. I think for almost any business, it's going to be a problem.
5 years is a long time in this space.
Oh yeah, super long time. 5 years, everybody's stuff is going to look different.
When you referred to some areas being top-down strategic mandate, is that like core product experiences or anything else outside of that? And then I always ask of entrepreneurs, what would a 10x more expensive version of the product look like where you spared no expense on the AI? You have also the Zap Connect event happening. So maybe tie all those together. What are the sort of new strategic initiatives product-wise? Where are you applying more AI than ever before, and whether or not that translates into a higher price point?
Yeah, I think in terms of a 10x higher price point, generally for us, that's going to mean moving from like a suite of tools to actually like solving bigger sets of solutions. And for us, where that sort of intersects with AI is we've launched things like tables, interfaces, chatbots. In addition to our workflow engine, we have one that's coming around code. And I think in all of these cases, we're thinking through what does like an AI first interface look like in those motifs. I think the world was captured by ChatGPT and we all felt, oh, chat is the new like user experience. But the further I get from that, I actually think a lot of the more traditional UIs we're used to interacting with are still great user experiences. You know, a table is a really good way to interact with stuff. A workflow is a really good way to interact with this stuff. But what if you reinvented it with AI as a first order primitive in these experiences? So that's a thing that we're paying a lot of attention to. And then on the enterprise side, we're trying to figure out how do we package all these things together to solve a 10x, 100x type of problem for you so that you as the end user don't have to walk in and figure out how to configure all this stuff from the ground up. We can come in and say, hey, here's more of an end-to-end solution out of the box. Maybe you have to tweak some things on the edges, but you're not having to build the whole dang thing from the ground up, which right now Zapier is a DIYer's haven. Like it's the best place to hang out. But I think we can do a little bit better job of just packaging some of the best use cases up for folks and saying, hey, this right here is going to change the way your marketing team works, or this is going to change the way your HR team works. This is going to change the way your finance team works if you use Zapier in this specific way.
Done for you by AI beats do it yourself.
Services are one of the best places for AI right now, is that services are premium priced experiences that you can offload a good chunk of the work to an AI. So you can still sell at a premium, but the labor to use it just went way, way, way down.
Does that collapse? It seems like that collapses.
That's capitalism in a nutshell, right? What's the Jeff Bezos saying? Your margin is my opportunity.
Right.
So eventually capitalism competes away all this stuff. And who wins? Consumers. We all win at the end of the day.
High consumer surplus is definitely one of my main predictions for the next few years.
Oh, totally. It's going to be fun for the consumer. I think for us that are building software, it'll be fun too, but I'm sure there's going to be some stressful moments as well.
Yeah. Well, this is great. I appreciate the time. Anything else you want to talk about in terms of event, new launches, or just anything else we didn't get to?
Come check out Zapier. We are not the same old product that you all have maybe remember as like that simple integrations tool. You can build a lot of crazy stuff on it right now. We are small business, enterprise, tables, interfaces, automation, full on across the board. It's been a fun couple of years of shipping over here.
Love it. Wade Foster, CEO of Zapier. Thank you for being part of the Cognitive Revolution.
Thanks, Nathan.
It is both energizing and enlightening to hear why people listen and learn what they value about the show. So please, don't hesitate to reach out via email at tcr@turpentine.co, or you can DM me on the social media platform of your choice.